Ever wondered how you measure an entire country's economy? I mean, it's a huge question, right? But economists have this really elegant answer. Today, we're going to dive into what's called the production approach. It's a fundamental way to see what a nation is really worth, just by looking at what it makes.
So, seriously, how do you take all that activity, every single farm, every factory, all the services, and just boil it down to one single number? It sounds almost impossible, but you'll see there's a surprisingly logical way to tackle it.
Okay, so the first tool in the economist toolkit is the production approach. And, the name kind of gives it away. It focuses purely on what a country produces, the total value of all the goods and services created inside its borders, usually over the course of a year.
This quote really just nails the whole idea. If you want to know how rich an economy is, look at what it produces. Simple, right? It feels so intuitive. But here's the thing. Just adding everything up isn't as easy as it sounds. In fact, if you do it the obvious way, you end up making a massive mistake. And that leads us straight to the biggest trap with this method, what's called the double counting problem. See, if we're not super careful, we can end up counting the value of the very same item over and over again as it moves through the production chain. And that gives us a wildly inflated, totally wrong number. Let me show you exactly how that happens.
Okay, check out this super simple example. Making bread. A farmer sells their wheat for, say, 1,000 rupees. Then a flour mill buys that wheat, grinds it up, and sells the flour for 1,500. Finally, a bakery takes that flour, makes bread, and sells the loaves for 2,000. So to get the total economic value, do we just add up those prices? 1,000 plus 1,500 plus 2,000?
Well, if we do that, we get 4,500 rupees. But nope, that's completely wrong. So why? Think about it. That 1,500 rupee price for the flour already includes the 1,000 rupee cost of the wheat. And the 2,000 rupee price for the bread, that includes the value of the flour. We've ended up counting the wheat 3 times and the flour twice. So, how on earth do we fix this?
The solution is actually a really brilliant concept called value added. Instead of looking at the final selling price at each step, we're going to focus only on the new value that's created at each stage. This is the key, the aha moment that gets us an accurate number.
So the crucial formula is this. Value added is the value of whatever a company produces minus the value of the stuff it used to make it. The intermediate goods or raw materials. This simple calculation basically strips away the costs of inputs from the previous step, leaving you with only the new value generated right there.
All right, let's go back to our bread example. But this time, let's use our new superpower. The farmer, they create 1,000 rupees of value straight from the land. The flour mill sells flour for 1,500. But remember, they spent 1,000 on wheat, so their value added is just 500 rupees. And the bakery, they sell bread for 2,000, but spent 1,500 on flour, so their value added is also 500 rupees.
So now, let's add up the value added from each stage. 1,000 plus 500 plus 500. What does that give us? 2,000 rupees. And here's the beautiful part. That total is the exact same as the final price of the bread for the consumer. See, we've perfectly measured the value created with absolutely zero double counting. Pretty neat, right?
So that's the logic for a single loaf of bread. Now to calculate a whole nation's gross domestic product, or GDP, economists just do, that, but on a massive scale. They apply that same value-added logic to every single producer across the entire country. Let's take a peek at how that whole process works.
Okay, here's the systematic process. Step 1. You have to identify every single producing unit. We're talking everything from the tiniest farm to the biggest car factory. Step 2. You classify all of them into broad economic sectors. Then, for Step 3, you calculate the gross value added, or GVA, for each of those sectors, using that formula we just talked about. Step 4 is easy. You just add up the GVA of all the sectors. And finally, there's a little adjustment for taxes and subsidies, and that gives us the final GDP number.
And what are those sectors, you ask? Well, they're generally broken down into 3 main categories. First, you've got the primary sector, which is all about pulling raw materials from the earth. Think agriculture, fishing, mining. Then you have the secondary sector, which is all about manufacturing and construction, turning those raw materials into finished goods. And finally, the tertiary sector covers all the services, which, for most modern economies, is actually the biggest piece of the pie.
And a huge plus of doing it this way is that it gives us a really clear picture of what the economy's structure looks like.
Like in this example here, you can see we don't just get a total size, we can see exactly how much each sector contributes. This is absolutely crucial for understanding if an economy is driven by its natural resources, its factories, or, like most developed countries, its service industry.
Now, there are some really important rules about what gets counted and what doesn't. We do include all the goods and services produced in the country, and that even includes stuff like a farmer growing food for their own family. But we don't include the sale of second-hand goods because their value was already counted when they were first made. We also leave out purely financial things like buying stocks, and for pretty obvious reasons, any illegal activities.
Okay, so we've gone through all this complex calculation. We have our big, shiny GDP number. But so what? Why does this number actually matter? What do people do with it in the real world?
Well, this one number is absolutely critical. It's what tells governments if the economy is growing or shrinking. It's a huge signal of economic strength to investors all around the world. It lets us compare the economic power of different countries, and it helps guide massive policy decisions on everything from taxes to building new roads and schools.
So if you remember just one thing from all this, let it be this. The production approach measures an economy by summing up the new value created at every single step of production across all sectors. That's it. That's the whole idea in a nutshell.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Now that you understand how to look at an economy through this production lens, maybe take a look at your own country's economy. What does its mix of agriculture, manufacturing, and services tell you about its strengths, its challenges, and where it's headed in the future? It's a pretty fascinating question, isn't it? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.